I never thought my wedding day would begin with a secret that would one day shatter everything I believed about love. But looking back now, I realized the truth had been hiding in plain sight from the moment I first saw Daniel standing alone in that rain-soaked bus station. He wasn't the kind of man who drew attention. He wore cheap, worn-out shoes, carried a frayed backpack, and spoke with the soft humility of someone who had learned to survive life by shrinking himself. And maybe that's why I felt safe when he smiled at me that night. I had grown up around people who measured worth through money, houses, and social status. But Daniel lived in a different world, a quieter world, one that made me feel like I could finally breathe, and for reasons I couldn't fully explain. I kept choosing him even when everyone around me warned I would regret it. My mother called him a good-for-nothing dreamer. My friends whispered that I was wasting my best years. And even my boss raised an eyebrow the day I mentioned I was dating a man who worked part-time at a local repair shop. But none of them understood the calm he brought into my life. He would wait outside my office with flowers he picked from public gardens, fix broken appliances in my apartment without being asked, and listen to every fear I carried like he had all the time in the world. And I remember thinking, isn't this what real love is supposed to feel like? We dated for a year, and during that entire time, Daniel never showed any sign of wealth, privilege, or hidden luxury, not even accidentally. He lived in a tiny shared apartment, rode an old motorcycle that coughed more smoke than it produced speed, and never once bought anything expensive, not for himself and not for me. When he proposed, he didn't have a ring box. Instead, he held up a simple silver band he had saved for slowly, his hands shaking as if he feared I might laugh at him. But I didn't, because I loved him for who he was, not what he had. If only I knew then that the man I married, the man I defended against everyone's judgment, was hiding a truth so massive it would tear open our marriage and force me to question everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and trust. The first cracks in our perfect little world began to show just a few months after the wedding, though at the time I didn't recognize them as cracks at all. I told myself they were just signs of stress, simple growing pains every new couple faces. But deep down, something in my chest kept whispering that Daniel was carrying a weight I couldn't see. He would come home late some nights with an unreadable expression, smelling faintly of cologne that definitely wasn't his because he never wore any. And when I asked where he'd been, he would smile gently and say, "Just running errands, nothing important." But the smile never reached his eyes. I remember one evening when I walked into the living room and found him staring at his phone with a look of pure dread before quickly locking the screen as if the device itself were dangerous, and saying, "Hey love, you're home early," in a voice too cheerful to be real. At first I convinced myself I was imagining things, overthinking the way I sometimes did. But then little things started piling up. Mysterious calls he rejected instantly, envelopes in our mail with no return addresses, and moments when he would fall completely silent mid-conversation as though remembering something he wasn't allowed to say. Still, I held on to the man I believed in, the man who made me soup when I was sick and traced circles on my back whenever I had nightmares, because loving him felt like choosing peace in a world that constantly demanded perfection. But that sense of peace shattered the day I overheard him arguing with someone on the phone, his voice low and tense, saying words that felt like a punch to my chest. "I told you I'm not coming back. I don't care about the inheritance. Don't contact my wife again." I stood frozen behind the bedroom door, my heart thundering as I tried to make sense of the sentence, because what inheritance could a poor mechanic possibly be talking about? When he stepped out and saw me, his face drained of color as if he'd been caught standing in the center of a burning room. But instead of explaining, he simply whispered, "Please don't ask me about that." Not yet. That was the first moment I felt fear settle inside me. A quiet fear that my marriage was built on a foundation I had never been allowed to see. I tried to be patient, to tell myself that every person has a past they're scared to open. But patience turns into self-betrayal when the silence begins to hurt more than the truth ever could. And soon I found myself analyzing every detail of our days like a detective living inside her own home. Daniel became more restless, pacing at night when he thought I was asleep, checking the locks twice, sometimes 3 times, and standing by the window as if expecting someone to appear out of the shadows. One night I placed my hand on his back and gently asked, "Daniel, are we in danger?" And he flinched so hard it felt like I'd touched a wound, then forced out a shaky laugh and said, "Of course not, sweetheart, you worry too much." But the tremor in his voice betrayed him. The following morning, while he showered, his phone buzzed nonstop on the nightstand, vibrating with a frantic rhythm that made my stomach twist. And when I finally gathered the courage to glance at the screen, all I saw were the same 2 words glowing over and over: urgent. Call back? I didn't open the messages, I couldn't cross that line, but something inside me shifted. Like the moment before a storm when the air goes still and heavy and, the world is about to change. Later that week, a black car parked across from our house. Windows tinted so dark, I couldn't see the driver. And it stayed there for hours, engine off, unmoving. Like a threat disguised as curiosity, and when I mentioned it to Daniel, he went pale and whispered, "Stay inside today. Please." His reaction terrified me more than the car itself. That evening he came home carrying a small metal box, dented and locked, something I'd never seen before. And he placed it on the table with a kind of reverence, staring at it as though it contained either salvation or destruction. When I asked what it was, he slid it toward me and said, This is why I can't sleep." My hands shook as I reached for it, but before I could open it, he grabbed my wrist gently and said, "Not yet. You have to trust me a little longer." In that moment, I realized trust wasn't the issue anymore in Wasn't. I was drowning in questions that the man I loved refused to answer. The breaking point arrived on a night that felt too quiet. The kind of stillness that presses against your skin like a warning. And I remember standing in the kitchen, washing dishes when I heard Daniel's voice from the hallway, low and desperate, saying, "I can't hide forever," before realizing he was on another call he hadn't meant for me to hear. Something inside me snapped Bennett out of anger, but out of exhaustion, Bess. Loving someone shouldn't feel like tiptoeing around secrets sharp enough to cut you. When he ended the call and stepped into the kitchen, I didn't smile or pretend anymore. Instead, I set the plate down, dried my hands, and said, "Daniel, I need the truth tonight. Not someday. Not when you're ready. Tonight." For a moment, he just stared at me like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, and then he sank into a chair and buried his face in his hands. "I didn't mean for you to ever get pulled into this," he whispered, his voice cracking in a way I'd never heard before. "I wanted to live a normal life. I wanted to choose you without the world interfering." My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I sat across from him, watching the man I married tremble like a child hiding from thunder. After several long seconds, he lifted his head and said, "The truth is, I'm not who you think I am." I felt the room tilt, but I forced myself to breathe slowly and wait, wishing I could pause time long enough to prepare my heart. Daniel reached for the metal box he'd brought home, unlocked it with a tiny key he wore on a chain beneath his shirt, and opened it slowly. Inside lay documents thick, official-looking papers stamped with emblems I didn't recognize, along with a sleek black access card and a photograph of him standing beside an older man who looked powerful enough to make governments nervous. "This was my father," he said softly. "He died last year and left everything to me." My eyes widened as I picked up one of the documents and saw numbers so large they didn't feel real. Figures followed by more zeros than I'd ever seen outside of the internet. "Daniel, what is this?" I whispered. He swallowed hard before answering. It means I'm not poor, sweetheart. It means I'm the heir to a billion-dollar empire I walked away from. I wanted to believe I misunderstood him, that maybe grief had twisted his memories or that those papers were exaggerated somehow. But the weight of his confession settled over me like a suffocating blanket, making every breath feel heavier than the last as I stared at the man I thought I knew and wondered how many versions of himself he had hidden behind. A billion-dollar empire? I repeated slowly, the words tasting bitter and unreal, and Daniel nodded with a haunted look that didn't match the fantasy most people would kill for. He explained that his father had been a ruthless tycoon, a man who built his kingdom through intimidation, manipulation, and power plays that left their family fractured. And Danielle, desperate for a life untouched by greed, had run away from all of it the moment he turned 18. He changed his name, cut ties with everyone connected to that world, and built a life so modest that no one could ever guess he had once lived in mansions instead of shared apartments, private jets instead of buses. As he spoke, his hands shook openly, and every tremor made me feel my own heart cracking because I realized he hadn't just hidden his wealth from me. He had hidden his identity, his past, his bloodline, everything that shaped him. I married a poor man because I loved you, I whispered, the truth slicing deep. But you knew that, and you still let me step into this marriage blind. He flinched, eyes reddening as he said, I didn't tell you because I was scared you'd see me the way everyone else always did. As a bank account, not a person. And hearing that hurt in a way I wasn't ready for because I understood the fear of being used. But I also understood the pain of being lied to by the one person you trusted most. My hands curled into fists on the table as I tried to process everything: his fake poverty, the mysterious calls, the parked car, the sleepless nights, and suddenly the puzzle pieces clicked together. Someone was trying to pull him back into the world he abandoned. Daniel, are they after you? I asked, my voice trembling more than I wanted it to. He hesitated before nodding slowly, his eyes meeting mine with a terrifying honesty. They want me to take the throne my father left behind, he whispered. And now that they know I'm married, they'll come for you too. Asterisk, the moment those words left his mouth. A cold shiver ripped through me so violently I had to grip the edge of the table just to stay upright, because nothing in my life had ever prepared me for the idea that marrying the man I loved could put me in danger. I stared at him, searching for even the smallest sign that he might be exaggerating, but the fear in his eyes was raw, real, and heavy enough to make my stomach twist into knots. What do they want from me? I whispered, barely able to form the words, and he reached across the table with trembling fingers as if trying to ground both of us. Powerful families don't like loose ends, he said quietly. My marriage complicates their plans. They don't trust outsiders, especially someone they can't control. His voice broke as he continued. They think if they pressure you, they can force me back into the empire I walked away from. My throat tightened until it hurt, and I couldn't stop the wave of anger and heartbreak that crashed within me. Because I had married a man I believed was struggling financially, a man I defended when people mocked his worn shoes and old motorcycle. And now I learned that not only was it a lie, but that lie came with enemies powerful enough to make us pray. Daniel, you should have told me, I choked out, and he nodded, tears gathering at the corners of his eyes. I know, he whispered. Every day I wanted to, but every day I was scared it would make you run. I pulled my hand away, not out of cruelty, but because I needed space to breathe, to think, to understand the size of the secret I had unknowingly been living beside. Silence settled between us, thick and choking, until he finally said, they reached out again today. They know where we live. That's why the car was outside. My blood ran cold. So what happens now? I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. Daniel took a long, shaky breath before answering, now. We decide if we face them together or if I leave to protect you. The words hit me like a slap, and for the first time since he opened that box, I felt something fierce rising within me thing that refused to let fear decide my future. I didn't answer him right away because the weight of his words sat in the center of my chest like a boulder, pressing so hard I could barely breathe. But beneath that crushing fear, something inside me refused to break the way he expected me to. I looked at the man I married, the man who fixed my broken shelves, laughed at my terrible jokes, kissed my forehead every morning again. I realized that no matter how big his secret was, no matter how powerful the world behind him might be, I wasn't ready to let fear dictate the story of our lives. You don't get to decide alone, I finally said, my voice steadier than I felt, and he blinked in surprise as if he had expected me to run, to scream, to crumble under the truth. I'm your wife, Daniel. If danger is coming, I deserve to know exactly what we're facing. He exhaled shakily, then stood and walked to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to glance outside before letting it fall again. They sent someone to talk to me, he murmured. Not a threat. Not yet. More like a reminder of what the family expects. My pulse quickened. What did they say? He swallowed hard. That the board is restless. That my father's associates don't trust my disappearance. That they want stability, and in their world, stability means dragging me back and molding me into the leader they think I should be. He turned toward me, his expression a mix of guilt and desperation. They won't accept you. They won't accept the life I built. They'll tear it apart to make me comply. I felt my breath hitch, but instead of panic rising, a strange clarity washed over me. Then let them come, I said softly, shocking even myself. I'm tired of living in shadows. If they want to confront us, we confront them. Daniel looked at me like he couldn't believe what he was hearing, his eyes glistening with something between gratitude and heartbreak. You'd stay? After everything I hid? I stepped closer, my hand brushing his. I'm angry. I'm hurt. But love doesn't vanish just because the truth is ugly. We deal with this, together. For the first time in days, I saw hope flicker across his face, but it lasted only a moment before he whispered, then there's something else you need to know. Something worse than the inheritance. Something I never wanted you to hear. Asterisk, the way Daniel said those words made my skin crawl. Because this wasn't the nervous dread he carried when talking about the inheritance or the family imperative. This was deeper. Darker, like he was preparing to confess something that could change the entire foundation of our marriage. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing the room as though the truth itself was a physical storm he was trying to outrun, and I stood frozen in place, watching the man I loved unravel thread by thread. Just tell me, I whispered, though a part of me wasn't sure I wanted to hear it. And he stopped pacing long enough to look at me with eyes that held both love and terror. The night before our wedding, he began slowly, my family found me. They cornered me outside the apartment and tried to force me to return, to reclaim everything. I refused. I told them I was done with that world. He paused, swallowing hard. And then they demanded to meet you. A sharp chill shot down my spine. Me? Why? He hesitated before replying. They wanted to assess you, their words not mine. They said if I insisted on marrying someone outside the dynasty, they needed to ensure you weren't a threat to them. My stomach twisted in disgust. You didn't let them meet me, right? His silence was the answer I feared. My voice cracked. Daniel, you didn't. He closed his eyes, guilt washing over his face. When they threatened to cut me off permanently, to destroy everything they had rebuilt, I panicked. I let them watch you from a distance. Just once. I swear I never let them approach you. I felt as though the ground beneath me shifted violently, my breath coming out in a shaky gasp. So they've been watching me since before the wedding? The room seemed to shrink around us as he whispered. I thought once we married, once I disappeared again, they would stop. But my father's death changed everything. They want their heir restored. And they want control over you too. Rage, hurt, betrayal of it surged at once, burning like fire in my chest. You should have told me, I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of fury and heartbreak. You should have warned me the moment strangers started deciding whether I was worthy of becoming your wife. Daniel stepped toward me, reaching out, but I backed away. For the first time, I wasn't sure if I needed comfort or space to understand the enormity of the storm heading straight toward us. I stood there trembling, feeling like every memory of our relationship had been stained by the truth he'd just dropped into my hands. And for a long moment, neither of us spoke because the silence itself felt like a fragile bridge suspended over a canyon of everything we hadn't said. My mind replayed every moment before our wedding, every laugh, every kiss, every whispered promise, and now all I could see was the shadow of strangers watching me without my knowledge, judging me like I was some object to be inspected. I trusted you, I finally said, my voice cracking under the weight of the betrayal, and Daniel's face twisted in pain as he whispered, I know. And I broke that trust, not because I didn't love you, but because I was terrified of losing you. I shook my head, tears burning my eyes. You didn't even give me the chance to choose with full honesty. You made decisions for me. You hid the danger, the surveillance, the truth. He dropped to his knees in front of me as though everything inside him had snapped. I'm begging you, don't walk away, he said, his voice raw. I will face them. I will fix this. I'll fight them if I have to. Just don't leave. But I couldn't think clearly, not while my heart was thrashing inside me like a bird trapped in a cage. So I walked past him and sat on the edge of the bed, gripping the blanket as though it were the only real thing left in the room. After several long seconds, I whispered, what do they want from me now? Daniel slowly rose to his feet. They want to meet you, he said, and the words hit me like a slap. To decide if I'm still allowed to stay married. They think you might distract me from my duties. Disgust churned in my stomach. So they think they have the right to approve my existence in your life? He nodded miserably. In their world, marriage is a transaction, not a choice. I let out a shocked, bitter laugh. Well, in my world, love isn't a negotiation. A heavy silence followed. The kind that makes you realize the path forward won't be easy. Maybe not even safe. And then Daniel said quietly, they sent someone this morning. They want an answer by tomorrow. My pulse pounded painfully in my ears as I whispered, then tomorrow, everything changes. The next morning arrived with a heaviness that settled into my bones before I even opened my eyes. And for the first time since our wedding, I woke up on the far edge of the bed, putting a space between us that words couldn't fill. Daniel was already dressed, sitting rigidly in the chair across from the window as if he'd been awake for hours, and when our eyes met, something inside me twisted painfully because I could see the terror of a man who expected to lose everything. They'll be here soon, he said quietly, and his voice sounded like a fragile thread stretched too thin, but instead of responding, I stood, got dressed, and let the silence do the talking. My hands shook as I buttoned my shirt, not from fear of them, but from the fear that I might crumble before I got the chance to speak my truth. When the knock finally came, it was soft, polite, even, but the sound echoed through the house like a warning bell. Daniel opened the door to reveal two men and one woman dressed in sharp black suits, their expressions unreadable, their presence filling the living room with a cold, calculated authority. I stood behind him, refusing to shrink, refusing to let them see the trembling in my chest. The woman stepped forward first. "We're here to discuss the future of the Davenport legacy," she said, the name I had never heard Daniel use, the name he had buried. My jaw clenched. "You're here to discuss my marriage," I corrected, stepping past Daniel until I stood directly in front of them. "So let's discuss it." Their surprise flickered for just a second, and that tiny crack was enough to give me strength. The older man spoke next. "You married our heir without knowing who he is? That alone shows a lack of preparation for the life ahead of you." I lifted my chin. "Or it shows that I loved him without needing his money." The woman's eyebrow arched. "We need to determine if you are suitable to remain by his side." The arrogance in her tone snapped something inside me. "You don't determine that?" I said firmly. "We do. Daniel and I, not you." They exchanged glances, clearly unused to being challenged, and Daniel finally stepped beside me, his hand brushing mine. "I choose her," he said, his voice steady for the first time in days. "With or without the Empire." The silence that followed felt like the world holding its breath until the woman finally spoke. "Then understand this. Choosing her means walking away forever." Daniel didn't hesitate. "Then I walk away." And just like that, the empire he was born into lost its air bit. I gained back the man I married, unmasked and finally free.